Welcome to Work in Progress, a podcast series where I pick the brain of thought leaders within the field of people and culture. My name is Pernille Brun, and in these talks we explore the latest trends shaping the future of work and the evolving landscape of modern organizations. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Ditte Buch Andersen, who is Director of People and Culture at Neurons. All right, welcome, Ditte. This is very nice. Thank you for inviting us. It's an informal conversation around topics, anything, people and culture, and then let's see where it takes us.
Awesome. Thank you very much for thinking of me.
How many people were you when you started out here in the company?
In total, I believe I was told we were 50.
50?
Yeah.
And you were the only people and culture person?
Yes, apart from the office. Well, there were two office people at the time, right? So there was an office manager and an office assistant.
All right, and how had they outsourced?
They hadn't.
Payouts? How did that happen?
So payroll was happening mostly in finance.
Okay.
And today it's very split between. It's a collaboration between people and culture and finance.
Yes.
And what else?
And how come you decided to merge it into people and culture, the payroll, for instance?
I think it's because it's a long discussion back and forth, and where does it actually live best? It's one of those. It's like you can push it back and forth, and we don't want it. But actually, it came about for a number of different reasons. In the beginning, I had thought, well, I don't think it belongs with us, but of course we are co-creators and we are the people who know about, who have all the insights on what should go into there. So there needs to be a strong collaboration regardless.
Yes.
Now, it just so happened that the person I then recruited for the position had a background where she knew about, well, both Denlund, that is what we use. And she also had significant insights on how to run it. Okay. And so it became more of what skills do we have and how can we apply them? And so we very often take that approach, right? Yes. I would hate to hire someone and just go this is a box and you have to squeeze into it and there's, no fitting around. So I also try to go by what motivates you the most and how does that fit with the business needs? Yes. So we can ensure engagement and ensure that experience is a great one for everyone involved.
There's a role description, and then of course you hire based on the role description, but then when people start out, you need to figure out what motivates you, what makes you tick.
Well, actually, it starts earlier, right? It starts sooner. It starts in the recruiting process that you go, okay, so which are the most important items on this giant list that I have. Yes. I mean, and ideally, I would have one person that fits all of these requirements. But let's face it, that's not how it works. Not when dating either, is it? It's I would like it. Yes, that's fine. You would like.
Yes.
But it's never.
What does reality look like?
What does reality look like? And also thinking about how, maybe what I would like doesn't equal what I need.
Okay.
Right. So there's also that figuring out how does a person also fit into the culture that you're trying to create, and how do they add to the culture? Yeah. I find that so important that to not just try to squeeze people into a box, but also look at what do they bring, and how.
Yeah. So it's not a culture fit, but a culture add. Yes. And that's very interesting, because that's one of the terms that is very often coming up when you look into new trends within P&C. It's one of those things that people constantly discuss. Do you, when hiring, do you need to hire for culture fit or culture add? Yes. And why is it that it's in your opinion needs to be a culture add and not just a culture fit?
Right. I think two things. I think that similarly to dating, right? We would be better off if we knew who we were before we started going out and attracting someone that we think we need. And it's the same for a business, right? Where you, if you think long and hard about what are the values that we want to cultivate, what is the type of employer and workplace that we want to be, and if you have all of those nailed, it's easier to go, well, at least we have a framework of what we want. Yes. And it's not to say that nothing that comes out of that can't fit in, but it's at least a guideline, right? A set of guidelines to say, look, we are performance-based. It has to be performance-based. So maybe a certain type of person would not fit into that by default. But you would have, again, their guidelines, right? But it doesn't say you have to be a certain person, and you have to fit into this box to work here.
Completely.
Indeed. So I think that's where the culture ad comes in, right? Where you go, okay, tell me about like who are you, and how do you deal with things? Like, how do you deal with adversity? How do you deal when people challenge you, conflict-wise, and that sort of thing? And what could you maybe bring? And what sort of some of it is implicit in the values and the motivation that they bring, but some of it has a lot to do also with experience and coming from somewhere else where they saw that, we used to do it like this over here, and that never works, so let's not do that. Okay, we can skip that step.
Yes.
Or it worked really well. Let's try to see if that might, be a good ad that we can use here. So it can be both values, and it can also be experience that you bring, right?
But that means when you enter a company as a head of people and culture, for instance, you need to look at, is there a framework or a set of principles or... So people often ask, how do you actually build up values or guiding principles or... And what's the process?
Yes. Well, so this is one thing that I cannot take credit for all by myself, right? Of course, we have a CEO, we have a COO, and of course they're very, not just involved, it's driven also by them, right? So, and especially in this case, our CEO. Yes. But what I did was I tried to facilitate it more and shed some light to it and talked about, well, how important this is. And let's make sure that we get it in writing. Let's make sure that we communicate it. And I drove a process of an actual brainstorming where we went, okay, so who do we want to be? Who do you see yourselves at?
Were these some of the questions you asked?
Yes, but it actually came about, we did a more thorough process where we had one person from my team interviewing 10 people, I believe it was, from people that we had kind of sought out to be like cultural bearers, or people who've been here for a while and who had thoughts around the culture. And
so kind of like ambassadors,
indeed,
or people that you would want to see more of. Or,
but also like who could maybe provide a little bit of a critical insights too, right? So both. Like we weren't only interested in people who were like, this is the best place in the world, because you also want to see like what's the backdraw of it all, right? Yes. So we did that, and then we did.
And then what kind of questions did you ask them?
So it's been a while. What kind of questions? So questions would revolve around like, could you give me like the three words that to you describe what this culture is? Yes. And then of course that's just an offset, right? Yeah. And of course asking people to elaborate on that. So what do you mean when you say fun? Yes. What's fun to you? Yes. And what do you mean? How does that actually, how is that? Like, does that mean that people are laughing all the time? Yeah. Does it mean that they're fun-loving? What is it? So getting a little granular. So it was that was also why it was interviews and not just a survey, right? Yes. To get some qualitative data here, right? And then with all the qualitative data that we had, we took that and we sliced it and diced it and said, okay, so what's being said? What are the words that are being said? What is the values that people contribute to those words? Yes. And then we presented all of that to the leadership, to CEO and COO, and said, hey, this is what is being said. Yes. How much of this rings true to you? Yes. Because of course it's their baby, or whatever you want to say, but it's they and as they grow, and as a company grow, of course, they're going to get further and further away from some of the things. Yes. So there were some surprises, and there were some moments, right?
And can you take it all for, of course you could take it for granted, but I'm also curious to hear, how do you then ensure that those values you end up will also bring you further and align with the strategy and the vision and mission? So maybe let's take the word fun, right? That might be a great value at a certain stage or time in the company's history, but what about later on, and what if it doesn't fit? How did you go about that?
So I would say that a lot of stuff had happened in our CEO's brain already, right? So he was ready to drive it in a certain direction. And of course, as you say also, there's a vision and a mission. So, and the third leg of that is the values, right? So that's kind of where it all drizzled down. So he had ideas, and my role here was to also play the devil's advocate, right? And go, okay, so that's great. Fantastic thoughts. Now, how does that align, do you think, with that? So asking those questions. And as you also said, like, okay, so if we're on this journey and we're expecting to, well, maybe 2 years is a long time, but think 2 years ahead, think 6 months ahead. How would that?
Will they still help us?
Indeed, right? And also, fun was never, it was never fun here. No, that's not what I mean. But it was never fun. There was an actual value, right? It was never set, but you had like collaboration, for instance. Like, okay, that's great. Okay, but is that a value that we want to be an absolute, or do we want to narrow it down even further? And so I think that a lot of what happens here, like it's actually killing your darlings, right? Because there's so many words and so many values that you're like, we couldn't live without it. We couldn't exist without it, which is also true. But some of them can still be like aligned under one, right? And we ended up with 3 words, and that was a hard birth.
What did you end up with?
So we ended up with integrity, which is based on like a scientific value that is very dear to our CEO. And we ended up with responsibility, and finally growth. So, and then you could discuss like, okay, so what is growth? What is, so there's a lot of, you can unfold it again, right? That's the idea. You start by minimizing all that you can, and then you unfold it again as you then start to speak to the organization about it. Like,
and then there was something about, you connected certain animals to the values I heard.
Again.
Why? Why did you do that?
I wish I could.
And what are animals we need to hear?
Well, so the animals are, I'll start by saying that, it's the integrity became an elephant, the growth, a gazelle, and the responsibility, a zebra. Okay. And so it came about again. I take no responsibility for this. I think it's a beautiful and a really, really cool way of doing it. But it's all due to our CEO, right? So he was very much at the time he was like thinking about principles.
So you mean you take no credit?
I take
it's
no
not
credit.
that.
Well, I take responsibility. Yes. That's a value. Yeah. Yes, I take no credit.
Exactly.
I take no credit for it. Absolutely. Yeah. So he had already done some thinking on like the types of companies that you can be, right? And there's the gazelle thing where you can like, which is about growth and but in a financial way usually, right? And that is where the gazelle came from because of the gazelle prizes, all that, gazelle companies, and then the zebra is a sort of thing we've been talking about that more in recent years in the world about, okay, so the responsibility that you also carry as an organization, that it's not just about, money making, but you also have a societal and an environmental impact and, all the ESG that's coming now actually, but there was at least a few articles back in the day about zebra companies. So hence the zebra and the responsibility. And then the final one, there was no animal attached to it, and it used to be a tiger, and I was like, well,
but you had elephant, you said.
Yes, indeed. It used to be a tiger, but when it was first a tiger, that one I take credit for because I was like, I don't really see what this predator is doing here, and it's also not African like the other ones, so should we maybe stick in the same region? And also, to me at least, the elephant signified something that's like very stable, integrity, that sort of thing. And then we looked it up to see like what words are
characteristics.
Indeed. So
of the elephant.
Indeed. So that's kind of how it came about. And I do think that it's a little bit of a stroke of genius to kind of tie these two together. Yeah. So
that the animals and the words.
Yes, indeed, because it gives you a bit more flavor to it. It gives you a picture. Yeah. And for many people who are visual, instead of just having like responsibility. Yes. what does it mean,
Yeah.
right? So,
Exactly.
so yeah.
So responsibility is a zebra.
Yes.
And when you talked about the zebra and the articles that came out of it, for those who maybe do not know about it, so there's been a lot of talk about unicorns, and then came in the zebra companies instead. So let's not only focus on the financials and the 1 billion or million or whatever, but the collaboration part and how you add to society. And is that something? Yeah. What can you give back more than maybe thinking about only your own growth? What's your take on that?
Oh, I love it. I love that. I mean, I hate and I love it because, of course, it creates a lot of work for me. But I also, because there is a lot of, with the ESG stuff that's coming on, and, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be, for many people, they think of it as an extra, which I can also see if you're a one-man band. That's a lot of extra to have to do. It's also a lot of
the reporting part.
Reporting, indeed.
Yeah.
But the way I see it is that once that's in place, it's no different than reporting on so many other things like finances, which is also a mandatory, right? We kind of have to do it. And I think that the way that it does help is by shedding some lights to some of the things that we've been completely oblivious about for so long, that it's just been like, well, we don't have any data on it, so therefore it does not exist.
Yeah, okay.
And similar to diversity, inclusion, and so on, it's like, well, I don't have a problem, so therefore there's no problem. And I think that, as a company, instead of going like, oh no, I don't want it because it's scary, because it is scary, instead going like, well, but actually what's in it for me? And there is something in it. I truly believe there. It's like, well, if we start educating ourselves more on like what is the actual impact that we have, we could actually use that in a business sense to go, okay, well, we're also trying to hire people to whom it actually matters, what sort of imprint that we have, what sort of purpose that we bring to the world, what is our purpose, why are we here? So it will make it easier for us to actually recruit those people and keep those people engaged while they're here. So I think that there's a lot of, and it's intrinsic to what I actually already do, not so much necessarily on the environmental part. Let's face it, I mean, we're but a small cog in the wheel, right? But, at least on the diversity and the social part, we're very concerned about what happens internally. But I do believe that we also have a responsibility and, in being part of the world. Yeah.
So it guides you both when you hire to look out for people who are attracted to workplaces that actually put a value on that. Puts a value on that, and but it also guides you in terms of your daily operations.
I would say,
In what? How do you manage that?
Well, so I think part of this whole thing with putting, for instance, the values in place, we also made it a thing to think about, well, what does this mean for people so that they would have some guidelines, right? What does responsibility mean in your day-to-day work? Well, it means take responsibility for your work. It means no pointing fingers. It means, that sort of thing, right? And so I would say that in and of itself, probably because I was so part of this, I live it. I feel like I live it every day. I mean, you'd have to ask someone else if it's true. But yeah, let's say, so for our internal processes, the processes that we put up in the HR sphere, I would say the responsibility and integrity bit is about, making sure that it's the best process, that it's not too elaborate for the size that we are, but to make sure that we actually get things done right and get shit done. Yeah. So instead of just like, because I've seen it plenty of times too, like it's a lot of trial and error this, right? But you can really get in deep if you have, for instance, a hiring manager who goes, oh, okay, so we're hiring this person, and you have no one to approve it, for instance, and you just go, okay, here's a contract, here you go, and you're really feeling that, oh, I'm just doing my job, I'm just, trying to deliver. Yes. But then it turns out that this was actually never approved, and it was never budgeted, and oh my God, now you have a situation, right? Yes. So
you use the guiding values as guiding.
Yes.
So exactly.
Well, that plus
steer
experience,
yes.
right? So
yes.
and again, yes, of course, like bringing that integrity and the responsibility into like, okay, but at the same time, never forgetting that there's a growth aspect that we also want to make sure that we can actually go there fast.
Yes.
So that's like, but not putting hindrances in place. So yeah.
Like what could hindrances be?
Well, if a process is overly lengthy or it takes forever for us to get back to people, it's like, well, so you as a hiring manager, you reach out and you say, hey, I would love to kickstart this, hire an SDR, something. And well, first off, it takes us a week to get back to you, and then secondly, it takes us another week to get a meeting in the calendar, and
That's not good enough. And Ditte, we could talk forever, but I think we'll have to come back and visit you another time, and then
very welcome
take another round on other topics close to your heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Work in Progress podcast on people and culture. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share on social media. For more resources on people, culture, and working in a modern world, please visit getsession.com and check out our articles, guides, webinars, and more. Thanks for listening.